Okay, welcome back. We're going to take a look at the other remaining API, the API called VAIO typically, but it stands for the vSphere API for IO filtering. So what's a filter, right? A filter is a function that sits inside the ESXi server's VM kernel that provides some additional capability. We call those data services. So you'll hear these used kind of interchangeably, filters and data services. And what we are able to do here is take advantage of additional features that the VM kernel can provide, or maybe third-party vendors can provide to manipulate the storage IO as it leaves the VM, passes through the VM kernel, and then finally leaves the host, right? One thing about the data services and the filters, though, is that they are agnostic to the underlying storage. You can use a whole variety of storage solutions here. This is just how does the ESX server actually interpret or manipulate the data as it passes through that host, right? So it's basically independent of your storage topology. And in the case here, VIO and third-party vendors can create data services such as caching and replication. That's actually examples of third-party solutions. The ESX server has built-in filters, by the way, for using things such as encryption and storage IO control. So let's actually take a look here. We've got our different types of IO filters. There's basically 4 types of IO filters as part of VIO. There are replication filters out there. There's encryption filter, caching filters, and storage IO control filter. So 2 of those are built in. Encryption is built in. It provides encryption for the VMs as the data passes from the VM through the VM kernel. It gets encrypted in the VM kernel. So then as it's leaving the ESX server, it's already encrypted in flight. The ESX server also provides storage IO control, which then allows us to prioritize the IO as it's leaving the host and then is sent off to your underlying storage. Third-party examples would be replication and caching. Working with third-party vendors, we can have the IO as it leaves the VM also get replicated to some external storage other than its primary storage location, and caching can have an implement for caching virtual disk data, maybe on an internal SSD cache designated disk if we like. So basically how IO filters work. Basically, this is part of the VM kernel. Like I said, there's a whole IO filter framework within the VM kernel responsible for intercepting the IO and applying the filters associated with the VMs. Now, how do we do this? This is basically another part about storage policies. When you have use of storage policies, your storage policy can implement not only where the VMs are going to go, that's using VASA, but also how we're going to treat the IO as it passes through the VM kernel. Is it going to be replicated? Is it going to be encrypted? Is it going to be cached? Is it going to be prioritized? Right? So they basically run in the VM user world to ensure that any filter problems affect the VM and not the entire host. But what we're also seeing in our picture, this is working with a whole variety of storage solutions out there. So the order of the filters is actually fixed. This is the order and how the filters are applied. There's a replication filter, there's an encryption filter, there's a caching filter, and there's a storage IO control filter. And that's the order, right? So if the replication filter is enabled, well, then the data will be replicated to an external location, and then we'll continue on with the filter stack. If you've enabled the encryption filter, well, now the data is being encrypted. And then after that, you might have enabled the caching filter, where then it might be cached on some local SSD drive. And then finally, you might have prioritized the traffic with a storage IO control filter before it's left the actual host. Now, you can choose to use any one of those filters or all of their filters or any combination of those filters, but they are going to be done in a specific order, listed in this order right here. Also, you can only use one type of filter of the same kind, right? So you can only have one replication filter, you can only have one encryption filter, and so on. But you can have all 4 filters if you want to use them. So in order for filters to function, there also needs to be a storage provider for them. So there's already built-in filters for storage IO control as well as encryption because, well, they're built into the VM kernel. But if you had third-party filters, like for instance, replication and caching, storage providers would need to be implemented there. Now, they're not necessarily always applied to the array. It all depends on how and where this is going to be implemented. It might be something that gets installed on the ESX server. It might be something coming from the array. It all depends on where the filter is being applied here. It's being applied to the VM in the VM kernel, but where is the underlying storage? But that's going to be under the discretion of the storage vendor. The storage provider will need to be provided somewhere, and then you'll need to then register it with your vCenter server. And then we'll use these storage filters as a means to set up storage policies to work with them. So for instance, if we were to again look at the storage providers page in your vCenter server, right? So click on your vCenter server, click on configure, select the storage providers, and then you'll see all the different filters that are there. And actually you'll see there are some built-in ones, right? Both encryption and IO control are built into the ESX servers. So if you look carefully at these IO filters, where are they coming from? Well, they're actually all coming from the ESXi servers, right? We see one here that belongs to host 1, one that belongs to host 2, and one that belongs to host 5, and so on. So these are actually the built-in ones. They reside on the hosts. The third-party ones will probably be implemented on the arrays. But still, you'll need to register them on your vCenter system. So again, to make sure everybody's paying attention here, your activity here to ask, how are the IO filters applied? What's the order in which these are going to be implemented? Do we remember? I know this is really just a rote memory question, but essentially we have the order, right? Replication comes first, then encryption, then caching, and then storage IO control. Again, they don't all need to be enabled. You can choose which ones you would like to enable for which virtual machines. This is actually all part of storage policy-based management to determine which filters will be applied to which VMs. The order is already dictated, right? That's the order that they're going to be applied. Replication, then encryption, then caching, then storage IO control. So this concludes our other storage API lesson, where we describe the vSphere API for storage awareness to ensure we're actually provided with the characteristics and capabilities of our storage arrays, and also should be able to explain how vendors can create storage data services, or IO filters, making use of this vSphere API for IO filtering, otherwise known as VAIO. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll see you in the next lesson.